Hello and welcome into this Monday, July 16th episode of the League Winners Fantasy Show. Today we have the AFC East on tap, but first a little bit of news from the week where I was gone. A team that we already talked about, the Houston Texans, officially signed Nick Chubb to the roster. Running back Nick Chubb leaves the Cleveland Browns, suffered that knee injury last year, now is in Houston. The biggest thing is that kind of takes Dameon Pierce out of the rotation, and in my opinion, likely off the roster by the time the regular season starts. Nick Chubb does not really hurt Joe Mixon that much, if only because he's not going to do much of anything through the passing game. Mixon may lose some carries, potentially a touchdown or two. I don't actually think this impacts Mixon very much at all, even if Nick Chubb plays the entire season fully healthy. He's not the same running back he once was, and I don't expect the Texans to use him as such. It'll be interesting to see as camp goes along if the reports are that he's healthy and he's doing well. Potentially, we could see something like Nick Chubb actually cutting into Joe Mixon's workload. But right now, I think the two biggest losers of this signing are Dameon Pierce and then the rookie Woody Marks out of Iowa State, potentially losing a little bit of work as well. But I don't expect him to be fully cut out of the rotation because they did draft him. They do expect things from him this season. Now, without further ado, to dive into the AFC East, starting with the Jets. Biggest two things there, Justin Fields is the new quarterback and Devontae Adams is gone. So no more Aaron Rodgers, no more Devontae Adams. Hello, Justin Fields. Now, what does that mean for the Jets, for the numbers? Fields obviously not going to throw the ball nearly as much as Aaron Rodgers did. How will that impact the receivers? Well, for Garrett Wilson, I project him to be a little bit better than last year, actually, because he should be seeing the lion's share of the targets. Fields will get him the ball. I don't see any problem with that. Fields is going to run the ball a lot as well. I have Fields projected for about 17 fantasy points a game, a decent number, nearly 1,000 yards rushing, 930 yards rushing and 6 touchdowns on the ground. That's his biggest asset, and I expect the Jets to fully capitalize on that asset. I'm throwing 18 touchdowns, which is plenty to represent Garrett Wilson, who I have receiving 6 of those touchdowns and going over 1,000 yards receiving. I mean, he can do both those things with Justin Fields as quarterback. I expect Justin Fields to kind of look his way a lot. I expect Breece Hall to be another big winner of the Justin Fields signing, not as much so on the ground as it is with the air. Teams are going to have to be a little bit more cautious with how they defend the run because Justin Fields is this running threat. They can't just load the box and attack Breece Hall because Fields can keep the ball. So even if you say the Jets are going to run the ball more, teams will, more stacked boxes and whatnot, Fields is a threat with his legs. I think that opens up Breece Hall a little bit. I do have him below 1,000 yards still. He's not eclipsed 1,000 yards in his career. I have him below that number at 972 yards. My apologies, 972 yards and 6 scores. I think he has a very decent season. Braylon Allen is the other back there. I have him projected for over 300 yards for touchdowns. Nothing crazy. I think Breece Hall through the air. I have him projected for 44 catches this year. I think he is a threat in the receiving game, and I think they're going to utilize him as such. And Justin Fields won't be afraid to hit him. The other receivers on this roster, Allen Lazard, Josh Reynolds, Malachi Corley, just to name some of them. I don't expect really big seasons from any of them. Allen Lazard, if he stays on the Jets, just because of all the rumors about Aaron Rodgers brings Allen Lazard with them wherever he goes. But if he's on the Jets, he'll be that number 2 threat. He'll take some of those targets, but I really expect Garrett Wilson to be receiving a lion's share of these targets and just be the alpha wide receiver one on his team. At tight end, Tyler Conklin is gone. That means it's a rookie Mason Taylor as well as Jeremy Ruckert, my apologies, getting those targets. I think they split them. I don't think there's one of those guys, at least at the start of the season, is on top. Potentially Mason Taylor could cement himself. The rookie could prove to be a reliable receiving threat, but for right now, neither of them are really draftable in fantasy because they're going to be sharing a lot of the work. And I just don't trust Fields to be able to support more than 2 fantasy relevant players, and I expect those players to be Garrett Wilson and then Breece Hall. That's kind of all there is on the Jets. There's not a whole lot to talk about here. There wasn't any crazy changes. Stats-wise, I do have Garrett Wilson nearly 100 catches on 158 targets. I think Fields is going to throw the ball his way a lot. Maybe a couple bad balls that we saw in Chicago, but I do think the ball's going to go his way, and I do expect him to be able to produce out of that. He's a guy I really liked. When it comes to more exciting offenses to project, the Buffalo Bills, led by Josh Allen, but I think the real story to talk about here to start at least is James Cook. Last season, 16 touchdowns after not rushing for more than 2 in a season. That was huge, in my opinion, an outlier. I have him coming all the way back on the 4 rushing touchdowns this season, but I still think he's going to get plenty more. I don't expect him to fall off a cliff. I just don't think the touchdowns will be there, and obviously that will impact his fantasy outlook. I have him projected for 970 yards and 4 touchdowns, as well as 2 through the air, so 6 total touchdowns. Still could be a fine season, but not anywhere near what he did last year, and likely not near where he's going to be drafted. People are going to remember those 16 touchdowns last year and be drafting him higher than maybe they should. Now, I think I'm going to actually end up with Josh Allen a little bit below where a lot of people have him, which is kind of weird to say. I only have him projected for 21 fantasy points a game, which is a lot, don't get me wrong. That's more than Lamar, more than Burrow. It's actually currently my highest quarterback number, but it felt low for me as I was statting him out. Just over 4,000 yards, 27 touchdowns. The biggest thing is going to be his ground game. I expect him to get some of those touchdowns that James Cook got. I have him projected for 12 rushing touchdowns this year on just 600 yards. If he can get to that 12 touchdown mark, he's going to be fine as a fantasy quarterback. I just think through the air, the lack of wide receivers kind of catches up with him. Stephon Diggs has been gone now for 2 years, and the number 1 wide receiver is Khalil Shakir, who I do like a lot as a player, but I don't know what you're going to do with Khalil Shakir as your wide receiver 1. You have Khalil Shakir, Keon Coleman, Joshua Palmer, Elijah Moore, and Curtis Samuel, with Elijah Moore and Curtis Samuel being the 2 names I want to highlight as the new names. Elijah Moore received a ton of targets in Cleveland last year. I just don't know how good of a football player he is. We seem to see it every offseason, the hype around Elijah Moore, and it doesn't really produce. But then last season he went over 100 targets in Cleveland. I currently have him statted out for 64 targets to be the 3rd targeted receiver and 4th highest target on this team. But I could be so far off on that. He could come out and become, honestly, I think it's in play for him to be the number 1 receiving threat on this Bills offense. But I just can't project that until I've seen it from somewhere other than a Cleveland team that just needed to throw the football to somebody. Khalil Shakir, I think, is the number 1 receiving option on this team. I have 92 targets, 71 catches, 800 yards, 5 touchdowns. I do have Keon Coleman leading the way with touchdowns with 6 touchdowns. And then Dalton Kincaid is a guy that I still like. I only have projected for 8 fantasy points a game, which isn't anything spectacular, but 85 targets, 62 for 6, 16, and 4. And if he can get some of those Josh Allen touchdowns in the red zone that I currently have projected to Keon Coleman, I think he could be a very valuable player. I did include the names Joshua Palmer and Curtis Samuel, which is kind of clear. There's a lot of names in this offense. Even though I have Khalil Shakir projected as the 1, there's so many guys here that it might be similar to what we've seen from the Chiefs in recent years in terms of wide receivers, where it's depends on the game as who the best receiver is. And that's kind of what we saw a little bit out of Buffalo last year. It could very well happen again. If Keon Coleman's healthy for a full 17, you have Elijah Moore, Joshua Palmer, Khalil Shakir's done it. Even with James Cook a little bit of a threat out of the backfield, and Dalton Kincaid, and even Dawson Knox still sticking around, it's really hard to say who's going to be the number 1 guy on this team. The other running back is Ray Davis, and I expect him to get a little bit more work this year. I'm 479 and 3 on the ground, and then just a little bit through the air, not a ton of passing work, which is really what keeps James Cook's value and where it is, which still isn't where he's being drafted. But I have him for just under 200 carries. That is James Cook, with Ray Davis at about 120 carries. And so I think Ray Davis could catch up to him as the season goes along. I think the Bills next year are going to look to turn this offense over to Ray Davis. There's some James Cook contract questions right now, so we'll see how that all plays out. But I expect him to play out his deal this year with the Bills, and then potentially move on to a new team. And if the touchdown production's not there, I don't expect the Bills to bring it back. And I think Ray Davis could be the beneficiary of that starting next year. A potentially very strong buy low candidate in dynasty leagues. In dynasty leagues, Ray Davis is a guy who could be an RB1 in the future, but this season he is the 2nd running back on this team. I'm for about 60 points a game. If James Cook gets injured, he's definitely a name to keep an eye on because he is the clear number 2 in Buffalo. That's about all there is to the Bills. With the Patriots, their big addition in the offseason, well, there's 2 of them. Travion Henderson of Ohio State through the draft, and then Stephon Diggs. I have so many questions on Stephon Diggs. Obviously, the boat incident is what it is, but there's been reports about him being fully healthy. There's been reports that he's going to miss at least 3 weeks. I currently have him statted out for 14 games played. Be that the first 3 he misses or 3 he misses in the middle of the season or something, I have him projected to miss those games. And so that kind of leaves the door open in the wide receiver room. But to start with the quarterback, Drake May's in his 2nd year, a guy a lot of people are talking about. I love him as a player. I don't know what the fantasy is going to look like. Just because I'm not super confident in his legs. There's been a lot of conversation about how strong of a runner Drake May is. That did not really show last year by the numbers. Now, he only played 13 games, but he averaged 32 yards a game in the games he played. Those numbers aren't spectacular. Stats him out for about 330 yards on the ground and potentially just 3 touchdowns because they do have 2 touchdown backs, guys that can score around the goal line. The question with those running backs is ball security. Ramondre Stevenson has a fumbling problem, as does Antonio Gibson. Travion Henderson is still to be seen what he can do as a rookie. Who knows in terms of ball security once he gets to the NFL. So how are they going to hold on to the football? Is that going to lead to more goal line opportunities for Drake May because they don't trust the running backs? I don't know right now. Currently, I have both Stevenson and Henderson projected for more rushing touchdowns than Drake May. But, 3,500 yards and 23 touchdowns through the air is what I have for him. Along with that on the ground does not make him a really reliable fantasy quarterback. If you want to take the shot on him, say, I love the running upside. Or I think he's going to break out even more as a passer with potentially Stephon Diggs playing 17 games. I don't blame him in the slightest, but for me, that's the guy that I probably will not have as many shares of come the fall. On the ground, I have Ramondre and Travion drifted very closely. I have Ramondre with a few more carries and a few more targets, but very close split. I have Henderson, my apologies, with one more touchdown on the ground. And I think that he could rush for more yards too. I'm at about 4.7 a carry compared to just 4 yards for Ramondre. And so this could be a very interesting split if Ramondre remains the running back one, or if throughout the season Travion Henderson takes that from him. My current projections is that Ramondre starts the season as the one, but Travion does supplant him by the end of the season. And if that happens, the playoff push could be the time you want to have Travion Henderson, a potential buy low candidate at the beginning of the season if Ramondre does in fact come out as the running back one. The rookie running backs are going to go a little bit higher in drafts just because people are excited about them. And who can play them, the new names, the young legs. But Ramondre Stevenson should open the season as the running back one, and it'll be his job to lose, which I fully expect him to lose, likely because of fumbles. But regardless, he'll start the season as the one, and I believe Henderson will have it by the end of the year, with Antonio Gibson just sprinkled in as more of a passing back, third down back type of player, kind of just limiting potentially Henderson's upside because of that third back. Even with Diggs potentially missing 3 games, I think he leads this team in targets. He's a guy that's going to go out there and demand the football when he's on the field. I think he'll play well. I have him projected for about 750 yards and about 70 catches and 6 touchdowns. If he pulls that off in 14 games, you're going to be very happy with him. But the question is what to do in drafts. If he's injured and isn't playing to start the year, are you going to waste a pick? And how early is that pick going to have to be? Depending upon the ADP, it could make sense to draft him, stick him on your IR spot, and hold him for those 3 weeks. He could also be healthy for week 1. As those reports come in, these rankings will obviously be updated. But it will be interesting to see what exactly comes of the Stephon Diggs situation. If he does miss time, I expect Demario Pop Douglas to be the wide receiver 1 in New England. I've really liked Pop Douglas for a few years here now. I've been projected for very similar numbers to Diggs, except this is over the course of the season, not missing those 3 games. And I think it'll be very interesting to see what he can do as the wide receiver 1 with some actual help around him. Kyle Williams was brought in out of the draft. Matt Collins was brought over from Buffalo. And then Kayshon Boutte is back as well. And so those 3 guys are just going to be almost depth pieces on this offense. They're going to be guys that are going to catch a touchdown, and you're going to be mad that it didn't go to one of your guys. Kyle Williams is the one biggest little maybe he does something out of that group. Just because he's a rookie, maybe he gets a connection with Drake May. I don't know what's going to happen with Jalen Polk, the rookie from last year. He will be on the roster. I don't expect him to have much of an impact. It'll be interesting to just kind of see what happens there. He's another name you can throw in there as a wide receiver that's going to do something, but not as much as I'd like. And on other days, too much, because you have somebody else on this offense. At the tight end room is Hunter Henry. We had a very productive year last year. I think he gets about 60 catches for a little over 600 yards and 4 touchdowns this year, which, as a tight end goes, you're going to take that. These are the kind of middle-round tight ends. And when I say middle rounds, I mean like middle-of-the-pack tight ends. Let me phrase that a little bit better. Middle-of-the-pack tight ends that you're going to be eyeing out as potentially your tight end 1 or a streaming tight end if you're going to stream your tight ends every week. And that's just something that's going to be interesting to keep an eye on. A name like Hunter Henry, a guy who could establish a connection with Drake May at the start of the season and really blossom into a favorite target of his because he's got those sure hands. A catch percentage of around 68% for the last few years. Could really be a reliable threat for Drake May and this offense. And if he does that, it'll be exciting for fantasy managers who grabbed it, especially when he scores a touchdown. Now, when on the topic of tight ends in the AFC East, Jonnu Smith of the Dolphins is a real question mark right now because is he going to be reporting? Is he going to get traded? Does he want to be in Miami? He had a phenomenal year last year. If I was taking a tight end 3 in fantasy last year, a phenomenal year. And if he's back, I'm projecting to have another great year. I've been projected for about 12 fantasy points a game on almost 80 catches for over 800 yards and 8 touchdowns. I also want to preface all of my Dolphins talk with this is if Tua stays healthy. Tua Tagovailoa is the biggest question mark on this offense. more so than will John Smith be there because he hasn't been able to stay healthy. And when he's healthy, everyone plays better. Tyreek Hill looks better, Jalen Waddle looks better, Smith looks better. Everybody looks better, but when he's out and when he's hurt, this offense falls off a cliff. Can the line do enough to protect him and keep him upright? If he plays all 17, I like his numbers. On the ground, he's almost non-existent, but through the air, I'm rated for almost 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns. I think he can have a very productive year, and he just needs to stay healthy. And if he does stay healthy, that helps Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle a lot. Two guys who disappointed last year, if only because they didn't have Tua. One could argue, and I'm going to almost make that argument. I have them both projected lower than I had them last year. I was very high on both of these guys last year, coming back off of that a little bit. But Tyreek Hill I projected for just under 1,000 yards and 7 touchdowns, and Jalen Waddle over 800 yards and 4 touchdowns. I think both of them could be very good this year and could bounce back and deliver you with upside at where they're going to be drafted because of those disappointments last year. The third receiver on this team is Nick Westbrook-Akine, and he is a good wide receiver. He's somebody that I think people are going to forget about, and I don't think he'll be like a phenomenal fantasy player, but just a name to keep an eye on as a guy who's a good football player and could produce. I'm projected for just 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, but if he can go out there and get some looks from Tua and get schemed open by the coaching staff in Miami, he could be a reliable player. The best player in this offense, and a number I was shocked to see, comes from Devon Achane. I've been projected for 18.5 fantasy points a game, over 1,000 yards on the ground, over 500 yards through the air. If I'm not mistaken, my touch number for him was over 300 total touches, which would be an astronomically high season, but it looks like he could get that. I think this offense needs something, and it's Devon Achane, and as long as he's healthy, I think he gets so much work. Mostert is gone. Jeff Wilson is gone. Jalen Wright's still there, and I expect him to have an increased role, but I think Achane takes another jump forward this year, and he has the potential to be phenomenal. I have him for 14 total touchdowns. I think he's a potential offensive player of the year candidate in this Miami offense. If Tua's healthy, he's going to give him the ball, and I just expect him to have a monster season. Dolphins did draft Ollie Gordon out of Oklahoma State this year at running back. I don't have very high expectations for him just because of how Jalen Wright was used in his rookie year. I expect Jalen Wright to take a little bit of a step forward and Ollie Gordon to almost fill into that Jalen Wright role from last year, which would not be fantasy relevant at all. It was a late draft pick as well. But yeah, Devon Achane was a number that really jumped out at me, and I do want to make the announcement that after I've made all my rankings and have gone through all the division breakdowns, I will be doing a surprises episode to kind of talk a little bit more about the players whose numbers really jumped out at me. And it wouldn't surprise me if Devon Achane was in that video for sure. If you want to learn more about him, it'll be coming in that video. But yeah, the Miami Dolphins have the potential to be a high-powered fantasy offense, even more so than Buffalo, just because of the more star power on the Dolphins compared to the balance of the Buffalo Bills offense, which I expect the Buffalo Bills to be the better team, potentially the better offense, but it won't be as clear who that production is going to go to, whereas this Dolphins offense, it'll be extremely clear exactly where that production is going to be coming from. That concludes the AFC East, and then we only have 4 teams left before we've completed the AFC. Thank you very much for tuning in, and enjoy the rest of your days.